In India, the housing crisis doesn't always look like rent. It looks like distance. It looks like a worker waking up before sunrise, traveling for hours, and coming home so exhausted that life becomes only survival. Because in a country that builds everything, millions still can't secure one basic thing: a stable home close to life. And the cruelty is not hidden. Opportunity concentrates in a few places, and housing does not arrive fast enough to hold the people who keep those places alive. So the city doesn't just get expensive, it becomes selective. It starts pushing people out without ever saying their names. You feel it the moment you try to rent. You don't scroll for what you like, you scroll for what won't destroy your month. Then the real costs appear. A deposit, a broker fee, proof of income, proof of employment. And sometimes a quiet screening that has nothing to do with the building and everything to do with who you are. Even after all that, you can still be ignored, not with a clear no, with silence. Because when demand is high, landlords don't need to explain themselves. They can wait for someone richer, safer, quieter, easier. So renting stops being a normal transaction. It becomes a filter. And filters create humiliation. A family of 4 stands in one room that can barely hold 2. They don't call it temporary anymore. It has become their normal. A living space becomes a sleeping space at night. A corner becomes a study space for a child. A cupboard becomes the entire storage of a life. Small space living isn't a trend here, it's compression. A bunk bed isn't a clever idea, it's the price of existing. A wall desk isn't minimalism, it's the last surface left where your life can function. Storage walls aren't style. They're evidence. Evidence that the room cannot hold a normal life, so the life must fold. These aren't solutions. They're coping. Because the alternative isn't better. The alternative is being pushed even farther away. And this is where India's housing crisis becomes terrifying. Because the housing problem doesn't only steal money, it steals time. And time is life. When you live far from work, the commute becomes a second job. Unpaid, unrespected, just endured. Hours vanish from your day like a quiet theft. And once that becomes normal, people stop living. They only operate. Wake. Travel. Work. Travel. Sleep. A life built around distance is a life without recovery. This is what people are getting tired of. Not tired in a casual way. Tired in a way that changes your personality. Tired of hearing that this is just how big cities work. Tired of being told to adjust, to compromise, to accept less dignity for the privilege of earning. Tired of feeling that the city needs their labor, but doesn't make space for their life. Now the shock factor. India is building skylines of glass and towers, but millions still live in overcrowded conditions and informal settlements because stable, affordable housing is not available where life actually happens. And the contrast is brutal. A city can have luxury towers that glow at night, while the people who clean those towers sleep in rooms that don't even feel safe. That is not just inequality. That is a system that sorts people by distance. The closer you live, the more human your life feels. The farther you live, the more your life becomes travel and fatigue. So why does it feel like this? Not slogans, not blame. just forces stacking together until pressure becomes normal. First, demand concentrates where opportunity concentrates. Jobs, education, transport, hospitals, services. People move toward the same corridors because that's where survival is. When too many people need the same places, housing becomes a choke point. And choke points don't create fairness. They create selection. Second, supply is slow where life is fast. Building is not only about land, it's approvals, infrastructure, water, power, roads, sewage, permits, financing, and timelines. While the system moves slowly, people's lives don't pause. A job offer doesn't wait. A family emergency doesn't wait. A child doesn't stop growing. So people squeeze into what exists, and what exists gets overcrowded. Third, housing becomes a financial asset. When property becomes the safest place to store value, prices detach from wages. Once they detach, the local worker becomes the weakest bidder in their own community. That's not ideology, that's pressure. Fourth, informality fills the gaps. When formal housing is unaffordable or unreachable, informal housing grows. Informal housing can mean living without secure contracts, without strong protections, without certainty that you can stay. A home can exist physically, but still feel legally fragile. And legal fragility becomes emotional fragility. Because when your address can be questioned, your future becomes fragile too. Fifth, the entry barriers are a private punishment. Broker fees, cash deposits, rules that change depending on who you are. A quiet rejection based on name, language, or background. So even before rent is paid, many people learn the same lesson. You are not choosing shelter. You are asking permission. Now people ask the question they always ask when pressure becomes unbearable. What is the government doing? On paper, India has large national housing programs designed to expand access to housing for lower-income households, including schemes aimed at supporting home construction and affordability. There is also a real estate regulatory framework, RERA, intended to bring more accountability and transparency to projects because delayed delivery destroys trust and traps families in uncertainty. There are state and city-level efforts too, affordable housing quotas in some developments, slum rehabilitation projects, redevelopment plans, infrastructure expansion, and public housing allocations. So yes, programs exist, regulators exist, plans exist. But people do not live on paper. They live in outcomes. And the outcomes many people recognize still feel the same. Rents rise in the places with jobs. The commute stays brutal. The room stays too small. The insecurity stays inside the body. Because a program does not help if the waiting is long. A regulation does not help if enforcement is weak. A redevelopment plan does not help if it pushes you farther away from work. A policy does not help if the only affordable option is a life made of travel and exhaustion. And that is why people are done. Done hearing announcements while their daily life gets smaller. Done being told the city is improving while their commute gets longer. Done being told to be grateful for a room that is too small for a human life. Now add the pressure point people feel but must talk about carefully. India has enormous internal migration. Millions move from rural areas to cities for work, education, and survival. When large numbers arrive in the same places, the cheapest housing segments tighten first. Rooms get shared. Low-cost rents rise. Informal settlements expand. And because newcomers need housing immediately, pressure concentrates at the bottom first. India also has some refugee and asylum-seeking populations. But compared to internal movement, the dominant pressure shaping city housing is domestic migration and concentrated demand. None of this means migrants are to blame. It means the system is being asked to absorb millions of lives, and housing supply is not keeping up. When supply fails, people start fighting over scraps, not because they hate each other by default, because they feel powerless, because they feel like the city is a machine that uses them and discards them. And this is where the crisis becomes bigger than housing. It becomes a national mood, a constant background stress that changes people. People stop trusting the future. People stop taking risks. People delay family. People accept less life. They shrink, not because they want less, because the system trained them to live smaller. So here is the question that should make people uncomfortable. If the places with opportunity keep expelling the people who make them function, what happens next? What happens to a country when millions live on temporary arrangements, overcrowded rooms, and stolen time, and start believing that stability is not for them? Subscribe to follow this series, country by country. This is not one place. It is a pattern. If this felt real, hit like. Tell me in the comments, what was the first thing housing took from you? Money, time, dignity, or the feeling that you are safe? Subscribe, because the next country is worse in a different way.